Hello and welcome to Resource Development Fundamentals. This is the first in a series of webinars that are designed to inform resource development professionals, club professionals, and board members about best practices in fundraising resource development to help build your capacity to secure gifts for your club. My name is Susan Snozzi, and I am with a department called Resource Development Operations and Collaborative Services. And our goal is to help each of you at the club level to achieve your goals in terms of financial support through private individuals, foundations, corporations, special events, and so forth, to help you build up your resource development. Today's webinar has four main objectives. First, to define the culture of philanthropy and discuss how you can build one at your club. Next, to look at key giving trends and look at what this data means for you. And what does this mean for us in the Boys and Girls Club movement? Third, to briefly review the resource development cycle and the steps to take at each stage. But overall, what we'll be focusing on is resource development as relationship development. So this isn't about trying to quickly get money and get out. It's about trying to build lasting relationships that will support your club in the future. So our first objective was to talk about building a culture of philanthropy. And the word philanthropy is derived from the Greek word philanthropia, which means a love of humanity. And this really is a great starting point for our discussion today. A culture of philanthropy is one in which the organization sees donors as investors who are trying to meet their own philanthropic needs through making donations to the club. A culture of philanthropy pervades the entire organization. Everyone in the organization is involved in the philanthropic efforts of building resources with the help of donor investors who are partners. Our partners then in a culture of philanthropy are people who have goals for the world. They're trying to help humanity through their generous charitable donations. So someone who gives to the Boys and Girls Club has charitable goals of helping children or of decreasing hunger, decreasing crime, increasing engagement in our community, decreasing problems that face our kids like childhood obesity, and helping kids to be more physically fit. Those are the philanthropic goals that our donors have, and we are an agent which helps to make those things happen. So we're seeing our donors as making investments, not as people giving us handouts, not as people who are giving because we twisted their arms, but people who are giving to our clubs because they have a charitable desire. They have a philanthropic desire they'd like to see met, and our club is able to help them do that. In a culture of philanthropy, resource development is everyone's responsibility. The kids can be involved as tour guides or in writing thank you notes. The board of directors is involved in helping to identify, solicit, and thank prospects. The event committee helps plan our special events. The resource development director can oversee the whole enterprise. Boys and Girls Clubs of America provide you with tools. Program staff are responsible for making sure that programs are properly executed to meet with donors' charitable requests. The club leadership helps set the vision and oftentimes is involved in engaging with donors before and after the gift. Parents and club volunteers may suggest prospects. They may themselves be making donations. They may be helping to make your club what it is. And finally, our donors, who are deeply engaged as philanthropists giving to our clubs. So when we think about the culture of philanthropy, we see everyone involved in the resource development enterprise, not just the resource development director or not just the club leadership. Development is a partnership, most fundamentally, of board members and staff members. Neither can do it without the other. Certainly, we say that a key responsibility of board members is being involved in developing relationships and helping to develop resources. But without the staff there guiding them, providing the back-end support after a gift is made, making sure gifts are spent responsibly, making sure that that impact is there for kids, the board member is held completely helpless. And similarly, without the support of a strong board, it is much harder for the staff to be able to do their responsibility in resource development. The next thing that we're going to do is look at some important resource development trends. These come from Giving USA, the annual report on philanthropy for the year 2014, and you can read a summary of these findings at givingusa.org. This is a really interesting study of how America gives and what it means for us. So first, last year, Americans gave $358.38 billion to charities across the country. So if you hear someone say there's just not enough money in our community, nobody's giving, they're probably wrong. If you think just 10%, just 1% of that money would be absolutely transformational for your club. So there's lots of money being given away. We just need to ask for it and build the right relationships to get it. As you can see by looking at this pie chart, most of that money that was given away, 72%, came from individuals. 15% came from foundations, 8% from bequests, and 5% from corporations. So that gives you an idea of the sources of revenue. And it probably, one thing that you notice is that most of that money is coming from individuals. Here's how giving by source has trended over time. Individuals have remained a relatively stable source of income, and the way that this breaks down even further we'll talk about in another slide. But you can also see that private foundations are starting to increase. Corporations are staying fairly consistent. Bequests are staying fairly consistent. But individuals and then those foundations are two really key sources of income. Here's how giving by individuals has trended over the last few years. You can see that there was a little bit of a dip when the market fell and when we started to have the recession, but that it is recovering, and that individuals remain our most generous source of revenue. That's who's giving the big gifts. So where's the money going? In the human services sector, which is boys and girls clubs, we are a human services organization. You can see that we are number 3. So religious organizations are receiving the most support, followed by education, followed by human services. And this is fantastic news because it means that we're out in front. People are really interested in supporting the kinds of things that we do at the Boys and Girls Club. One thing that I also think is really encouraging about this is that there are these other sectors that you see, health, arts, culture, and humanities, even in some cases environment. These are things that we're doing at our clubs too. So there's a possibility of reaching out to donors who don't normally give to the human services sector because of the programs that we have in the clubs that still help them meet their charitable desires and that still are of interest to them. This just shows the changes in giving by type of organization, and you can see that from 2012 to 2013, those 2 calendar years, human services has increased. So we're actually receiving more money now than we have in the past, where religion and education are receiving less money than they had in the past. So people are interested in what we're doing. They're interested in human services. They're interested in the kind of life-changing work that's happening at the club. And it's up to us to just get that story out there and really help make that magic for donors. You can see giving to human services is also increasing. So all good things for us as we're out trying to raise money for the Boys and Girls Clubs. Based on this data, there are 4 key recommendations that come forth, and we'll talk about each of these in turn. The first is focusing on individual giving. Second, harnessing your organization's volunteers. Third, broadcast your mission and tell your story. And fourth, know the trends. So let's talk about each of these. First, focus on individual giving. You'll remember when we looked at how all of that $300 billion plus was given, that 72% was coming from individuals. If you combine that with 7% of the foundation giving is giving to family foundations, giving from family foundations, that's another 7% of individual giving because those family foundations are just made up of individuals. Another 8% of that giving is bequests. Then you see 87% of all giving is coming from individuals. So when you think about how you spend your time at the club in resource development, are you spending 87% of your club on individuals, or is most of it going to special events and corporations? You should spend your time where you'll get the money, and the best return on investment is through focusing on individual giving. The next recommendation is to harness your organization's volunteers. For 3 reasons. Volunteers help. 65% of people volunteered their time in the past year to a religious organization or charity. Volunteers support. 83% of volunteers donated money in the past 12 months. When they're volunteering, they're seeing the wonderful things that you're doing firsthand. They're making connections with the staff, with the kids, with your programs, and so they're more likely to make donations. And lastly, volunteers give more. So volunteers donate 10 times more than non-volunteers. So that's a great source of not only help for your organization, but help for your bottom line. The next recommendation is that you broadcast your mission and tell your story. The number one reason that people are giving for their donations is the ability to make a difference, the impact of their gift. Lots of us think that it's really all about the tax benefit, the financial relief that someone can get through their gift. And I've seen clubs who have really emphasized that in their messaging to donors. Donors know that if you are a 501c3, that their gift is tax deductible. They know the Boys and Girls Clubs is a charity. So they know that their gift is tax deductible. That's not what they're concerned about. What they're concerned about is the impact of that gift. So with an understanding that your best source of income in terms of private giving is through individuals, we'll look at the resource development cycle as relationship development to help get a better understanding of how to gain donations from individuals. I will mention that this is just sort of an introductory webinar to provide you with some foundational concepts, and we will have webinars coming up about each of these stages of relationship development. So we're just going to do a nice overview of the resource development cycle. You can see the first two steps are what's referred to as the prospect pipeline. This is where you start to identify and discuss those people who might be potential donors. If they make it through the pipeline and are deemed to be a good prospect, then they enter into the circle of relationship management with cultivation, stewardship, solicitation. This is your relationship management. And you'll see that once someone enters into relationship management, it's a circle. They never leave. So even as you're cultivating someone, you may be stewarding them from their previous gift. So let's talk about each of these stages. The first stage is identification. And this is where we look at whether someone is a good prospect for our club. Here you should start with your existing donors because they have already shown that they're interested in making gifts to your club. They already know something about your organization and you already know something about them. You can use research tools to help you find new prospects, whether this is doing a Google search, looking at people who are supporting other organizations, looking at who is wealthy in your community. Lots of research tools can support you as you are trying to identify new prospects. And third, enlisting the help of your board. Who is their network? There's a document that you'll be able to download after this webinar that's called the Board Circle of Influence activity, which is a great one to take to your board to start finding out where are those connections between board members and members of the community, and how can you connect those people to the board. So what makes a good prospect? Three things: affinity, ability, and access. We'll first look at ability. This is the first thing that people think about when they think about someone being a charitable donor. And I'm sure everyone on this call has had someone suggest to them Bill Gates or some other wealthy person that they know about and say, you should be asking them for money. Well, the ability to give and a willingness to give is only one of three aspects that make someone a good donor. Next is access. Can you get in to see that person? Is there someone who can open the door for you? And that's really the role of your board. Your board can be absolutely instrumental in helping to get you in to tell the story of what's happening at your club. And then thirdly, affinity, or what you might call club love. This is, does this donor care about the Boys and Girls Club, the kinds of work that we do, our mission? Is this someone who's given to other youth-serving organizations? If someone has ability, they're wealthy, and you have access, a board member can get you in to see them, but you don't have affinity, they only give their money to, let's say, guide dogs for the blind, that's not going to be a good prospect for you. So during identification, you will make sure that those people who are suggested to you or who you're considering as potential prospects have each of these three areas. This is why starting with your existing donors can be such a good idea, because you already have access and affinity. Once you've figured out who you'd like to identify as your donors, the next step is what's called qualification. And here you start to set your priorities. So This is called segmenting your prospects, where you're dividing them up into sort of A, B, and C. Who do you want to cultivate now, later, and long range? It's better to have organized interactions with a few prospects than to be overwhelmed with too many. And so you can prioritize them by your highest priority, your second priority, and your long-range priority. The next stage in relationship management is cultivation and discovery. And we'll have a whole webinar about cultivation coming up, but this is really where you build relationships with these individuals. Cultivation contact is like cultivating a seed. It takes time, it takes attention, and here what you're doing is progressing your relationship with the donor stage by stage to help bring them closer to the club. Each time that you contact the donor, you learn more about them in cultivation and discovery, their interests, their financial issues, their emotional needs, their decision making. So during cultivation, you are doing basic activities which help to expose the donor to you and you to the donor. This is where you present your case for support, you introduce your leadership, and you start to move them toward presenting a proposal or making an ask. During cultivation, you listen very actively and you ask probing questions. So here you might be taking a donor out for coffee and learning more about their charitable priorities in the community. You might be walking them through for a club tour and noticing what things they're really excited about. During cultivation, your goal should be to visit with each prospect at least once per 8 weeks and more frequently during solicitation. That way you're able to build up that relationship, get to know that person better. Great cultivation techniques can be inviting them to things at the club. So perhaps they're a judge for your Youth of the Year competition, or they're helping to serve the bread at your Thanksgiving dinner. During all of those times, you can discover more about the donor that will be important when you are eventually going to solicit them, and you'll be building important connections between them and the club. I'm frequently asked, how do we know when we should ask for a gift? And this is art and science. Unfortunately, there's no hard and fast rule that after you've had 5 cultivation visits, you should ask. Sometimes your donors will give you cues like, what can I do to help? Or I'd sure like to see you doing more in terms of college preparedness. When they say these kinds of things, they're indicating to you that they might be ready for a proposal. But here's a good chart that kind of sets out rules of thumb for when to ask. Now, this document is available for download after the webinar, so you'll be able to look at this and keep it as a rule of thumb for yourself. You'll be cultivating and working on building that relationship with someone who you don't know well, who's only supported you modestly, and with whom you've had little or no interaction. A prospect like this with intense cultivation could be ready to be asked in 6 to 9 months. Briefing, which is the next step, is where you get prepared for a solicitation. You would be starting to get prepared and building your strategy for someone who has a good relationship with your organization, who needs more in-depth cultivation, who needs a little more understanding of your strategic goals and funding plans, and who's maybe 1 to 3 months out. And you would ask when you have a strong relationship, someone who has significant knowledge of your organization, when you have a great gift strategy already developed, and when that individual is ready to be asked for a gift now. So the next step, as you can see, now we're going to brief. And briefing means preparing everyone who's going to do the ask, who's going to seek the investment. And I'll tell you, this is an absolutely vital step so that everyone's on the same page, so that we're all asking for the same amount, the same gift opportunity, pointing out some biographical information that might be useful in conversation. For example, how was your Alaskan cruise, or how's your daughter doing in college? During briefing, the soliciting team should be able to figure out why they're going to ask this prospect at this point, why now, why this person, so they know once and for all that this is the right ask, the right opportunity, the right match for this person. And then lastly, during briefing, you can discuss 3 or 4 possible objections. What might that person say? An objection doesn't necessarily mean no, it just might be a concern. So for example, it might have to do with when their fiscal year closes out. You could say, what if we put this off until next fiscal year? It might be that they'd like to bring their husband or wife in to hear a little bit more of the proposal. Then the objection is simply answered with a, great, when can we follow up and meet with both of you? So predict some objections and think about how you're going to handle them. Particularly for board members who may have less experience in going out and asking for gifts, being well briefed can really be a plan for success. Finally, after all of this relationship building, it is time to seek investment. Remember that you're always building progress toward the ask. So when it's time to seek that investment, you'll increase your success with a prepared team, a personalized proposal that's made just for that one prospect, a very specific ask with the dollar amount included. You'll have a much more successful ask when all of the steps before it have been completed and when there's proper follow-up after the ask. So sometimes it's tempting to identify someone and say, well, they go to church with my board member or they're next door neighbors with my games room manager. I think we can go ahead and ask them now. You may be able to ask them now and you may be able to get a small gift that's really based on their personal relationship with the solicitor. But what you want is to be able to make a gift that's based on their philanthropic goals and based on their relationship with the club. And to get those kinds of gifts, it takes some relationship management. The cycle doesn't end with the gift. The last step is stewardship. During stewardship, you're going to show the prospect your gratitude and esteem. Step one is getting a thank you note sent out almost immediately upon receiving a check. It should only be a day or two to turn around a thank you note. Donors who are properly and promptly thanked increase their next gifts and are more likely to make additional gifts. And you want to hang on to these donors after you've gone to all of this work to make them your donors, so be sure that you're showing appreciation quickly and frequently. To steward, you'll maintain your relationship with that donor because really your stewardship is just cultivation for the next gift. Your donors deserve to know how their dollars are spent. What's the impact? What's the progress? So you'll keep them involved. If, for example, I supported the Passport to Manhood program, maybe you want to have me in for one of your Passport to Manhood sessions. If I supported you general operations, maybe you want to have me in for one of your activities, Day for Kids, let's say, to see how the club operates and to see the impact of your gift. You might invite your donors in as an advisor, provide them recognition for giving, give them lots of information about what's happening at the club, news clippings or electronic newsletters, things like that. Continue to involve them in the club. If before their gift you would have invited them to judge your talent show, then after your gift you should invite them to. And do all that you promise. If you said this money is going to purchase a van so that we can provide transportation for kids, then use that money to purchase a van to provide transportation for kids so that you are a good steward of their dollars. And this is the most fun part of the whole process. So this is a great way to involve board members as well, because thanking people doesn't have the same level of anxiety for us as asking them for a gift. And if you start to get board members and volunteers involved in the stewardship piece of things, what can happen is they become more comfortable with the resource development program, with the club, with donors. They start to see it really as a philanthropic partnership, and it becomes easier to ask for gifts in the future. Now, you're probably thinking individuals aren't the only way that you can get gifts, and that's true. There are other sources of charitable gifts. We'll have a webinar about each of these. Special events, foundations, and corporations are 3 key sources for clubs. But each of these do come with a few caveats. Special events are very expensive and time-intensive for clubs. You can end up having to pay money to make money. The return on investment can be lower. Special events also can ebb and flow depending on various things that you can't control. There's a club I work with who scheduled their special event, and there was a blizzard that day. So they lost out on that revenue. Another club that I work with scheduled their special event, sent out their save-the-date cards, and another local youth-serving organization who would be their direct competitor was having an event the same day. So each organization raised half as much revenue as they would have the previous year. So it's very hard to bank on how much a special event is going to raise. They also can really burn out your board and your volunteers because they take so much labor. If you think about trying to get all of the stuff for a silent auction, imagine a board member running around town to pick up jelly baskets and gift certificates. It could take them 2 hours to do that. If that board member instead took those 2 hours to take a friend on a tour of the club to start letting you build a relationship with that friend, you would have a potential major gift instead of a basket of jelly or a gift certificate to a restaurant. Foundations are another source of charitable gifts. The caveat of foundations is that in a down economy, they aren't able to give as much because they often use their endowment to support giving. Foundations also can change their charitable interests, which doesn't usually happen with individuals. So there's a foundation that I used to work with, and they changed their charitable priority from youth-serving organizations to guide dogs for the blind and telemedicine. And so my club was out the $15,000 we had budgeted to receive from that foundation because they no longer supported youth-serving organizations. So be wary of having too much of your money come from sources like foundations and special events. Corporations can have some of these same problems. When something very pressing happens, let's say a natural disaster, corporate dollars can get diverted to that cause, as well they should, but they'll be diverted away from you. With a change in leadership can come a change in charitable priorities as well. So corporations are not always that steady source of income that individuals can be. So build a well-rounded program that gets its support from multiple sources, and try not to have more than 20% from any one source except individual giving, just as the way it is in the Giving Trends USA report that we looked at earlier. Here are a few tips for success for you. First, always remain donor-centered. It isn't about your needs, it's about the donor's needs. And donors don't give to you because you have a need. They give to you because they have a need to support children, to change the future, to make a difference in the lives of a kid, to make our community better. So that's what you're really trying to tap into. Next, enlist the help and support of your board. You'll be so much more successful if your board is there to help you. Next, have a plan to succeed. A good resource development plan will let you know how much money you need to get from various sources, the timing of all of your initiatives, and will help you to be more successful and help you to have more board buy-in. Make philanthropy everybody's business. Involve the kids, involve the club staff, involve your board. Use BGCA resources to support you. Visit thefundraisingbank.org. Subscribe to our newsletters. Use your Director of Organizational Development to help you build up your annual campaign. Use the tools that are provided by BGCA so that you can be successful. Are there any questions? If you should have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. You can call or email me at any time. I would love to talk to you about resource development. Again, this is just a foundation for what's to come next. So I hope that this provides you some grounding in resource development and makes you feel excited about building relationships with individuals and helping to make some of that $300+ billion come your way to support your mission. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to connecting with you on future webinars.